Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan, and today I'm happy to have Steve Lewis back on the podcast. It's his third time on the podcast. He is a great friend of mine. He's also an architect of note. This time, he's going to tell a very personal story. His whole neighborhood was decimated by the January wildfires that hit Los Angeles. He's going to tell his story. He's going to reflect on maintaining a unique community. It's clearly an opportunity and a major challenge. Happy to have Steve back on the podcast today. Hey, Steve, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
Doing great, Ted. Always good to be with you here.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I've already introduced you, and I've already introduced our topic. And we're going to be talking about the fire that decimated your community. Could you just talk about your story? Talk about what happened that night back in January.
Oh, wow. Well, it's still surreal. But on the night of the 7th, which was a Tuesday, the wind was really blowing as it does from time to time, coming off the San Gabriels down into the neighborhood. But it was particularly rough, and Edison cut our power early in the day. So as it was approaching the evening, I suggested that my wife Jill and I go down to my cousin's place. At least we'd have power and could eat and stuff like that. And then I looked out of my bathroom window upstairs to the north and saw the mountain on fire, and not only the fire itself, but the front line of the fire moving downward at that distance and scale suggested that this thing was moving really fast. So we headed out, and we still never imagined that the fire would have gotten into the neighborhood. So the next morning when we decided to go back to the neighborhood and pick up a few things, it was before they had set up a security perimeter, and we were able to drive through. And when we turned onto our street, to our amazement, there were trees and homes on fire burning, and the wind was like a blowtorch, and it was just fight or flight at that point. We did go to the house and grab some stuff and bolted out, kind of in shock, you know.
Yeah. Never thought that could happen to you.
No. And then, of course, I have family members. My cousin lost a home, good friends, and my 3 neighbors right across the street from us, their homes burned to the ground. So it's been something to wrap your head around. Now, as an architect and urban designer in the community, I've gotten involved immediately with my NOMA organization, the Southern California chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, realizing that a great number of the residents in West Alta Dena are Black folks who 60% of whom are seniors. So that presents a real need for assistance. And I'm happy that through that organization and the American Institute of Architects, both LA and Pasadena chapters, have been very supportive of residents and stood up a lot of assistance programs.
Thank goodness. Let's talk a little bit more about the fire. I think 29 people died. Is that right? 14?
I heard 17.
17 people? Maybe it was between the Palisades and the Eaton Fire, which was what wiped out Alta Dena. Way too many deaths, thousands and thousands of structures burned down. Something, I think 16,000 structures in Southern California,
total.
all burned down. And like you said, now your house survived.
Whew. It did. We have a 1929 Spanish mission, stucco 2-story red tile roof. But interestingly, the fire got onto the property and ignited a wooden fence between our next door neighbor and our home. And as I learned later from my neighbor's nephew, who was on the property with a garden hose, just trying to keep things hosed down, that firefighters did show up. And I believe when they were trying to put out the fires that were happening across the street, sadly unsuccessfully, they turned around and saw this flame in my yard and put it out. Wow. And so I think we got lucky. We just missed it by that much.
And how long have you lived in the community?
Well, in our present residence, we moved in 1993, but prior to that, from November of '79, Jill bought what's called a Jane's Village home, a small stucco Tudor home in the west side of Alta Dena. So I moved in with her in September of 1980, and we've been Alta Dena residents, since then.
Yeah.
Which just means that we know the spirit of the place.
Yeah. Now your house survived. I've seen the burn marks on the fence, on your fences, and I know that the base of your tree burned, and way too close for comfort. And then of course everything around you burned. So it was like your house was in the middle of a bonfire, and everything just must reek, right? All the air, all the ducts are clogged with smoke, and everything is just a mess.
Well, that's why we're still taking advantage of a certain friend's Airbnb in the neighboring town. Because the soot and ash layer over things that are not visible right off the bat, but if you run your finger across the surface, it comes up dirty. For the first 2-3 weeks, when you open the front door, it smelled like a campfire inside. That has abated to a large degree, but you can still smell it.
And then there was obviously lots of toxins. We've talked about this, lithium-ion batteries, people that had electric vehicles or battery energy storage, those all burned and were a mess. There's lots of lead paint, asbestos, everything, just a big mess. And as you've described to me before, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and with homeowners' permission would basically, I think the term was, you scrape the land, right? And took several inches of dirt as well, right?
Yeah, 6 inches of dirt that the homeowner, as I understand it, is required to replace on their own. So the Army Corps excavated and took out, and now the owners have to put back.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, we're on the south side of our street, and none of the south side homes burned. The homes on the north side of the street, 5 in their entirety, and several others whose garage structures in the back burned, but homes managed to make it through.
And I've been up in that neighborhood. It's just eerie. All you see are these chimneys, right?
Yeah,
and you can see from block to block where you couldn't see before. What do you call the chimneys?
The sentinels that are watching out over the community. The only thing left.
Did your community have the looting that we've heard about? Also, one of these perverse side effects of these events.
I'm only aware of one incident that supposedly happened on our street, where someone's car got stolen from in front of their house while everybody was gone. But the Army Corps and local law enforcement set up these pretty tight perimeters, and they weren't allowing access in and around. And then for weeks after, they were posted at the corner of Lake and New York Drive, and just watching over stuff. And we signed up for a voluntary discretional sign up with the sheriff's department so that they would come by every day and make checks, because we could see it on our Ring camera from afar, that they were showing up and just checking on the property. And knock on wood, we've been lucky so far. Yeah,
well, thank goodness. How would you describe Alta Dena? It's a really unique community here in Los Angeles, isn't it?
It really is. It's flown under the radar for a long time, but it has this sort of special sauce where you have rocket scientists from the Jet Propulsion Labs and the Zorthian Ranch artists, WPA or artists, all mashed up into this community, which in many respects we consider walkable. The establishments that we would frequent, like on Fair Oaks, you had the Little Red Hen restaurant, which was just a classic, and that owner has vowed to come back. Then on Lake, you had the Foxes, which everybody knew. But these are iconic places that are cherished by the neighbors, right? But so many of those businesses along Lake Avenue burned down really badly. And the idea that you had this real mixture of professional backgrounds or vocational backgrounds with racial backgrounds and political backgrounds, when you would meet up in the coffee shop, the coffee gallery, there'd be these impromptu conversations going on, and they were sort of cherished, and that was the identity of the place that we all value so much. And what's made so many vocal about Alta Dena is not for sale, and we're going to bring this culture back,
And I've read in the papers about this term multi-generational wealth. Talk about that. What does that mean?
That's big. That's big. So just rewinding a little bit, in the 40s, redlining was alive and well, and covenants on properties did not allow for the sale to blacks or Jews, for example. Alta Dena was a place where families could settle, and they did. A lot of middle-class black families moved into Alta Dena, and they started growing their roots deep in that community. Their kids had these wonderful experiences as children growing up, and their children. So in the case of my next door neighbor, the Clays, their family goes back generations. They owned 5 homes in Alta Dena, 3 of which burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Not an uncommon story that these families congregated in on a street, an area, and they many of them lost multiple homes. And what we find is the younger members are committed to coming back. They're Alta Dena. They went to John Muir or Pasadena High School, and they're partisan. Their roots are here. They're coming back. Their grandparents maybe not.
And this whole notion of multi-generational wealth, I presume that the earlier generations bought the properties when it was affordable. And now all of Los Angeles is unaffordable. And so Alta Dena really was a place that people could afford to live and have this extended family. It was very unique, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the temptation over the last 15 or so years since it was discovered and gentrification began in Alta Dena was that some of these folks who own their homes outright were getting offered $1 million, and they would take it and they'd go elsewhere. So when Alta Dena's black population in like 1970 peaked at around 42 to 45%
of the population there.
Today it's 18%. And yet if you'd asked any of us, black, white, or indifferent, longtime resident, newcomer, what do you think the percentage of black residents is in Alta Dena? And they would have told you 50 or 60%, because there's sort of this cultural overlay that people embrace, and it's warm and fuzzy. And that is part of the special nature of the community. A lot of people talk about the diversity as what drew them to the community to come move here, the more recent arrivals. They've been respectful of the heritage and history and not trying to necessarily overwrite it and remake it into a new thing, That in and of itself, I think, is rare.
I do too. And another sad reality is that I presume, or I think I've read, that many of the homes were not insured, or not fully insured, not enough insurance to rebuild to the position that they've been in before, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think my knowledge is anecdotal, listening to people talk about it. I haven't seen data, but I think that that's probably the case. And that's brought about a conversation since the county's planning department and the building and safety department are allowing an owner to submit plans for a rebuild for permit, but also submit for an ADU under the same permit, and potentially can install that ADU and connect it to utilities before the main house is rebuilt. So that is a way that someone could take their less than optimal insurance settlement and get back on their land.
Yeah, that's really important. So now let's talk about you're an architect, and you don't just design buildings, you design communities, and you think through the infrastructure and how that reflects on the culture, how that nurtures, enhances the culture. How do you go about that after a calamity of this magnitude?
Yeah, I know that, the residential neighborhoods will densify in some way, whether it's ADUs or S9 lot splits and multiple units on the same single family lot. But the culture will be resurrected in our commercial and civic spaces. Our parks like Farnsworth Park, the Alta Dena Community Gardens, things that were really decimated by the fire and the wind that will come back. And the potential of maybe rethinking the urban design of our commercial corridors like Lake and Fair Oaks, where, as I understand it, business owners had already been lobbying and complaining about parking being a problem to their patronage and not being able to get enough business in the door because of parking things. And we know that there are many precedents for how you can create parking behind the storefronts that line the streets and define the urban character of place, which I think is going to be really important, that we don't somehow come back as the anywhere in America is parking in front, shop set back. That's not going to work. I think Sierra Madre has a good model for how on Sierra Madre Boulevard you have these shops that come right up to the property lines, and there's some sidewalk post-COVID seating and dining, and this, sort of extending the pedestrian realm out into the street a little bit, but the parking is behind, and you have these through points in the fabric where you can park behind and walk through to the front street, and I think that's a model that we may be looking at.
So you're seeing some, I think of it as this huge opportunity and this huge, or even huger challenge, but you're seeing some really progressive things happening, like you said, in the public spaces and in the commercial spaces. What about the homes? I mean, you mentioned some ADU units and some lot splitting or shifting to multifamily and things like that. But it seems to me from what I see on the news that understandably homeowners just sort of want to get back to what they had. They want to just rebuild the way it was. Is that what you're largely seeing in the residential sector?
I mean, for the people who are very directed and know what they want to do, they're coming forward saying, I want to just, build back like for like what I had. And the county is allowing you to rebuild the square footage that you had with an additional 10%. So if you had a 2,000 square foot home, you could now build the 2,200 square feet and stay within your assessment, stay within the sort of grandfathered positioning on the site, if you will, setbacks and so forth. But many are thinking about trying to build back better, and that is potentially configuration of the house and the materials to be more fire resistive and the systems and so forth. What I will say is that there are a number of groups, one of which I'm advising, which is called the Foothill Catalog Foundation, where they're seeking to create standardized plans that are in the character of the homes that were prevalent before the fires, whether it's a craftsman bungalow or a Spanish red tile roof stucco, or what became popular in the 70s were these ranch homes. And many of the people who weren't able to buy in other places but could buy there, they've been chasing this American dream of home ownership, which we've always heralded as the American dream. And when they couldn't get it here or couldn't get it there, but then could get it in Alta Dena, they're going to hold on to that notion, and the idea of building back something different or quote unquote better may not be attractive right off the bat. And that's why first listening to people before we come with an answer, we come with a question, and understanding where their value proposition is and what they're interested in, and then introducing the possibility of getting that back, but in a better way. That's where a lot of the work needs to be done, and where we're seeing the one-on-one alignment and participation among our architect friends here and residents who are trying to figure it out comes into play.
And people are being asked to think rationally when their emotions are still running wild, right? I mean, I can't imagine you've really settled down. Your mind is not calm after all this disruption, right?
Exactly. It's unsettling. It's kind of like, in some days it's like conflict avoidance. You don't want to make any decisions. You just don't, you're just not ready to make decisions. And yet life goes on and we have to go on.
Right. Let's talk materials for a second. When I first moved to California, or moved back to California, this is my third tour of duty in the state. I lived in Laguna Beach, and Laguna Beach up in the Alta Laguna, the highest parts on the ridge, had all burned down, and many of the homes were rebuilt with concrete foundations and concrete roof tiles, and the selection of materials to make them really resistant to fires in the future. Are you seeing that kind of thinking in Alta Dena?
Absolutely. a lot of the large meetings that have included representation from county, but also from the architectural organizations that are working and talking to these neighbors, are really talking about, and the code is going to be updated, but in advance of that, best practices are being promoted with proven materials that have fire ratings that are, and systems that can still allow for an aesthetic representation of the style that you might want, but behind it is this very resilient, resistive set of systems and assemblies.
Yeah.
One thing, for example, I'm sorry, is like vents into attic space, which embers entered and homes ignited from the inside and burned from the inside out. Those are now being rethought, whether you should even have attic vents or have a certain fine grain mesh that prevents those embers from coming in.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you could have a tile roof and you could have stucco walls, but it's those embers that are able to sneak in, basically, that is really hard to protect against. I know I live in Glendale, as you know, and we even have landscaping requirements that you have to have bushes up against your houses. And of course, that's the first thing that the fire department says is clear the vegetation away, probably 8 or 10 feet away from the house.
I think they're saying 5 feet right now as a buffer. But yeah, absolutely. I mean,
so we just, and what advice can you give to homeowners that haven't been through what you've been through? I mean, is there anything that I should be doing right now with my home? I certainly haven't done anything to protect my home from fire.
Yeah, it's so interesting because our homes, your home and our home, are pretty similar vintage and not too unlike in construction systems. But our crawl space under the main level, which is maybe at most 18 inches, has mesh vents that allow for venting of that space.
As do we.
And those, the grading of the screen is something to look at to check and see what the sort of spacing is on the mesh, and maybe replace that with something finer. Or I even thought about installing channels to either side of those and having a sort of a steel plate that could drop into place in the event of an occurrence that could then just seal it off. So I think it's we're identifying the vulnerabilities and addressing them. The obvious ones are the attic vents and the crawl space vents. Other than that,
you say that's obvious, but I don't think that's obvious to many people, right? But it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense, and that true disclosure, I certainly haven't thought about that for my own house, but it makes a lot of sense to me. We have those vents going into the crawl space, just like you're talking about. They've got a screen on there that I think is designed to keep the rats out and the mice, the vermin, I guess you'd call it. But we're not thinking in terms of fire. Nothing about that at all. So
I should say that while those measures are going to be helpful, in every preventative measure will count in the event of an occurrence, but the variable here was the wind and the wind speed. It created a veritable blowtorch in those channels of wind. And I want to make sure I mention that the wind flows were kind of channelized. And that's why you could see like 5 homes on one side burned and a house, and 5 on the other side burned. And how did that one house survive? And it was really bizarre luck for many whose homes survived that way, because there are these little islands of a single house in the midst of utter devastation that you have to scratch your head and wonder what the heck.
And that makes sense. Do you ascribe this all to climate change? I mean, as I understand it, we had a very wet year a couple of years ago. We had lots of vegetation, unusual amounts of vegetation and growth up in the hills. We then had drought, unusual levels of drought. So all that vegetation dried out and became just tinder for fuel for fires. And then we had these, you mentioned the channeling of the winds, but we had wind speeds that were at this time of year, or the middle of the winter as it was, way unusual, well over 100 miles per hour. And so is that climate change, Steve?
Absolutely, I believe it is. Science bears it out that atmospheric conditions are becoming more extreme due to, you know, the atmosphere picking up moisture at greater levels and creating more extreme variability in climates. When you see those, they started calling them a few years ago, Al Roker, the polar vortex. And you can just see the jet stream and its changes that are happening. You can see the melting of the ice caps and just the desalinization of the oceans from, introducing much more fresh water from the melting ice cap. These are things that are accumulating, and they're happening right under our noses. And we may already be at a tipping point, Ted. You know that better than I do, where there's going to be a point which nature just wreaks havoc. And as we can see coming out of the charred earth, green, nature is resilient. It's going to be here after we are. So
following on that, it seems like we're all to blame for these fires. We are all incrementally adding to this carbon imbalance in our atmosphere that's causing this climate change. We're all continuing to drive our cars and to enjoy this amazing quality of life that we have. We're all responsible. I know there's been a lot of the blame game. I find it very disturbing. I know everybody wants to pounce on Southern California Edison for, I think the origin of the fire maybe was related to the electricity distribution system. But fundamentally, this is a matter of a societal issue that we have created this imbalance in our atmosphere and this buildup of carbon dioxide, and therefore climate change, and that causes the exacerbation of the ferocity and the frequency of the storms. So it's really kind of on us, isn't it?
Well, it is, and our policymakers, which unfortunately the whole issue of climate change has been politicized over the last 8 years or so, right? And what should be just responding to science has become, ideological separator of our neighbors and us at some degree. So we each then have, as individuals, the opportunity, if not responsibility, to do what we can what's within our control, and sometimes we can't, right? Because we live in. I take the metro, as you know, but not everybody does, And leaving the car at home or minimizing the miles driven, those are things. The electrification of our appliances. I'm buying a new stove and it's not electric. So, well, guilty as charged.
Yeah. Well, we're all doing our bit, some more than others. You're doing a lot, and I know you're driving an EV, and as I like to say, the best place for an EV is at a metro station. But I did want to make the point that it's easy for us as a society to blame our electric utility or to blame somebody else for this, when I think it's a major, deep systemic issue that's going on that we're all part and parcel of, and we all do need to do our bit. In fact, we need to step up and do even more. I wanted to just in the last few minutes talk more about the biggest challenge, which is how do you maintain the culture of the community? I know you've been to lots of meetings. There's a whole big focus on rebuilding and building back better. How is NOMA? How is the AIA? How have you all been able to help with that aspect of this calamity?
Yeah. So one example is a month or so ago, Art Center College of Art and Design down in Pasadena. 100 of their students, faculty, and staff have been affected. 30 of them lost their homes completely. So they did a fundraiser, and they included as part of that two of those kind of cherished restaurants that burned down. One, I used to walk around the corner from our original home to Little Red Hen on Fair Oaks. And the house from which I would walk around the corner was a Janes Village Tudor stucco little thing in the midst of some of these Janes Village homes that are cherished. And that entire block is gone. And the Little Red Hen and its adjacent business is gone. So she's going to come back, the owner, and they're helping her. And so IKEA has committed to redesign a new restaurant for Little Red Hen and another restaurant, Amara, that burned down, and furnish them completely. So that's a great gesture and an example for others to maybe follow, where philanthropy can play a role in the re-establishment of the things that will signal to residents that the culture is still alive and will be preserved and extended into the future. But in terms of the knit of community relationships that are so strong, and with that disbursement of those people to places, either hotels close by or relatives in Rialto or wherever, the lessons that I've recalled from urban renewal in the 60s, where those neighborhoods were destroyed for highways and the communities dispersed out into a broad diaspora, their social networks have remained intact. And in fact, there may be places within those communities that residents return to on the weekend to go to the barber shop or the nail salon or the church or a restaurant. Still keep them tethered together. And with the advent of social media and Facebook and other things, ways people can communicate and continue to keep their networks alive and well, I do have hope that the fabric of the Alta Dena community will remain intact, even if it's compromised physically in terms of the number of people able to go back physically and have that.
And what can people outside of your community do? I appreciate the philanthropy and the IKEA Foundation and others. What can individuals do to support Alta Dena and the Palisades fire victims and that community as well? What are the steps that some of us can take?
Well, I mean, a lot of the victims of this set up GoFundMe. So from a financial standpoint, there's a site, and I don't have it, but I've been on it, where you can see just an endless list of people and how much their GoFundMes have, produced. And I know Walt Butler, who was a business owner. He had a sports shop on Washington, I think, and Walt's in his 90s now, but everybody knows Walt, and Walt got $1 million on his GoFundMe within like a couple of weeks. So that was unusual, but so financially, there's always ways to contribute. Red Cross, for the immediate recovery, but I think not forgetting about the communities, Palisades and Alta Dena, and keeping it on one's radar, because the opportunities do arise, whether they're single events that are put together, whether they're concerts or fundraisers or what have you. That's one thing, but I think just having the words spoken and put into the air is important spiritually, that people remember these special places in their nature and get curious about them and want to know more about them. The Mount Low Hotel in the 19th century, up in the mountains, you take a train up Lake Avenue to the train depot building, which is still made it through the fire, beautiful old brick building, and they would disembark and get on a horse and carriage, which would take them to the top of the lake, and they'd enter into the gates of the Mount Low estate and get on a funicular train that would take them high up into the mountains to the Mount Low Hotel. Alta Dena was where the sanitariums were for tuberculosis and other things. They were strewn with poppy fields and orange groves. So nature's going to have to play a role in the near future, in the interim, of what happens to the land while we're waiting for places to be rebuilt. So I think that's another chapter. I've had several prominent landscape architecture programs from Berkeley, from Harvard, express interest in having their studios do creative ideas about that future that will dig into the palimpsest of that past and reflect it somehow in strategy. So I think we'll see a lot of that,
So out of the ashes rises this new growth and this appreciation of the culture that was and that will be. Hey, Steve, thanks for sharing. Sorry you've been through this.
Well, you wrapped it up with a beautiful sentence that I think really captures it, Ted. Thanks for that, man.
All right. Take care, man.
Cool.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.